A crisis is a disruption in the network of economic relationships that allow the capitalist economy to function normally. Possibly the main aspect of the 2008 crisis was the lack of faith that loans will be repaid. This in turn causes lenders to stop lending or severely restrict lending because of this fear, also known as a freezing of liquidity. The business sector requires its flow of credit in order to operate, meaning they can meet their short-term, day-to-day needs. Most firms have to produce before they can sell, and in the meantime, they regularly borrow in order to pay its workers and its suppliers. This is how a large part of the capitalist system functions. If workers don't get paid and supplies don't get bought, nothing gets produced. Or worse, the debts they owe can't be paid off. If this continues for a lengthy period, the whole system would collapse. A lot of leftists and many far rightists think that the bailouts were unnecessary. It's commonly repeated that it is proof of the greed of the capitalist class or that of the big government somehow being socialist by supplying the rich with free money. While at the same time, these rightists claim that it's taking from the rich and giving to the poor is socialism, showing that they have no idea what they're talking about. Another argument that is made is that the money could have been spent differently on protecting mortgages from being foreclosed on people's homes or invest in infrastructure. However, this is only focusing on one aspect of the disaster, the slump, which is not the worst of it. In truth, not having the bailouts of the financial sector would have completely destroyed the capitalist system in the U.S., possibly the entire world, given how interconnected the international financial institutions are. The real immediate problem was the liquidity lock, that capital was not flowing to those who needed it because of a break in confidence that it would be paid back. This lack of lending had to be dealt with somehow. This is why the Federal Reserve became the lender of last resort and put through what is known as quantitative easing, which is just putting more money into the system and demanding that it be loaned out to end the credit freeze. Unfortunately for capitalism, credit institutions didn't really give out that much of the money once they got it. They just entered it into their books as profit, essentially because there was no mechanism to actually force them to give it out. Insanely enough, they proceeded to do this twice more afterwards with the same result. There was literally nothing else that could be done to end the crisis within the context of maintaining capitalism. There are socialist alternatives in ending the crisis, though many measures including nationalizing the banks. No matter how hard a market fundamentalist may cry, that's not real capitalism. It is, and that was the only capitalist solution to the crisis. Karl Marx spoke of capitalism being a system of contradiction. This could not be any more perfect example of it. The economy recovers when the money becomes liquid, but the financial institutions won't allow it because they don't have the confidence that it would be paid back. They don't have confidence because the economy is not moving, but the only way it moves is by loaning out money. This is one of the reasons why capitalism is stupid. One of the views of the roots of the 2008 crisis is that its roots lie in a crisis of the 1970s, a crisis from which the world never fully recovered from, a destruction of capital that has not been repaired like it was for the post-World War II boom. Anyone in serious economic circle has been afraid of a repeat of the Great Depression, and as such has put forth policies to slow and prevent the destruction of capital, a crushing of the value of capital assets, as well as the physical destruction of capital. The destruction of capital is not only an effect caused by a slump, it is also the mechanism leading to the next boom. If a company can generate, say, 3 million annually, but the value of the capital invested into the business is 100 million, the rate of profit is only 3%. But if a destruction of capital value takes place and a new owner buys up the business for 10 million instead of 100 million, then the new owner's rate of profit is 30%. That is a catalyst for a new boom. This massive destruction of capital hasn't taken place in the likes of the Depression, so as a result, there's only been a partial recovery, largely through these factors. 1. Declining real wages for most workers and other austerity measures, as well as exporting the crisis into the third world. And 2. A mountain of debt mortgage, consumer, government, corporate to paper over the sluggishness and mitigate the effects of the declining real wages. Because all of this debt being run up, there has been a constant debt problem, and it will continue until it has been dealt with. A. Sufficient capital is destroyed to once again make investment truly profitable. The present-day crisis may well end up being this moment. Or B. There is such a panic that lending stops and the economy crashes, uttering in chaos or fascism or warlordism or whatever. Or C. Capitalism is replaced by a new human socialist society. As we can see, credit bubbles are the result of trying to grow an economy through debt faster than the creation of value and production. The more complicated and widespread credit markets are, the greater degree in which there is a forced expansion that can take place. In doing so, there is a greater degree to which the more of a credit bubble than there is real value created in production. Thus, you get a greater crisis. Imagine that demand for assets such as homes or stock shares increases without a corresponding increase in the new value being produced. This causes the prices of these assets to rise on paper. People and businesses' wealth increases, so they now have the means to borrow more, and they become irrationally exuberant. And all of this leads to a further increase in demand, and so forth and so on. What caused the credit bubble in the 2008 crisis was the housing bubble. This bubble was actually created by a weak U.S. economy. First, the dot-com stock market bubble burst. This caused the economy to go into a recession that was exacerbated by the 9/11 attacks later that year. To deal with the fear that there would be a financial collapse after 9/11, the Federal Reserve lowered short-term interest rates. Once the recession ended about mid-2003, employment continued to fall. Thus, the Federal Reserve continued the short-term low interest rates and reduced them even further. For a full 3 years, beginning in October 2002, the federal funds rate, inflation adjusted, was actually negative. As a result, banks borrowed money from each other and then lent out that money, paying back less than they borrowed once inflation was taken into account. This economic strategy was dubbed cheap money, easy credit, and it created a bubble. Now, because the stock market recently shrank from the dot-com bubble, this new cheap money, easy credit flowed into it, primarily into the housing market at first. Because it was so easy to get credit, those who normally wouldn't be able to get approved for it now could. Working class people who couldn't get a mortgage now could because credit was so cheap. Many people who now for the first time could get a mortgage went out into the market looking for homes to buy. Of course, when many people are out to buy something, the price goes up because of demand. Thus the prices of homes inflated. In fact, these prices grew astronomically. The total mortgage debt and home prices grew almost exactly the same rates between 2000 and the end of 2005. 100% and 102% respectively, as measured by the Case-Shiller Home Price Index. Followers of Marxist economic theory understand that crisis in capitalism stems from the system of production-value production, a fact that the market and production are not linked in a simple cause and effect way. Generally, it is understood that there is not a single disturbance in the sphere of production that causes a crisis. Rightly, what happens in the sphere of production sets limitations to what occurs in the market. So it is undeniable in this sense that the root of the U.S. housing crisis is in the system of production. The increase in the price of homes was far greater than the creation of new value in production to pay the mortgages in the long run. This new value from production is the source of all income for homeowners to be able to pay their mortgages. To demonstrate this, from 2005 to 2008, the increase in income for the regular homeowners was only 1/3 of the rise in home prices, meaning that the people who purchased the homes never received enough income to pay the mortgages. This is the reason why there was a real estate bubble. A rise in asset prices or the expansion of credit themselves are not excessive. They are excessive only in relation to the underlying flow of value. Bourgeois economists use different language to describe the relationships between economic actors. In fact, it's commonplace to assess whether homes are over or underpriced by looking at the underlying flow of income. Of course, some economists are not blind and did see this crisis coming. That did not, however, cause them to stop doing what was causing the coming crisis. Instead, they just continued to reap in the big profits from the cheap, easy credit and then try to protect themselves when the day came that it all fell down. Here we can see the mindless drive towards profit not only caused the crisis, it actually prevented those who were aware from trying to stop contributing to it, or at least properly protect themselves. A reason why a lot of people in the industry didn't foresee the problem is largely attributable to the fact that home prices in the U.S. have never fallen at a national level since the Great Depression, so it's seen as natural that home prices would keep rising. This is what caused a lot of people to ignore the fact that people who were less worthy of credit risk were getting that credit through risky subprime mortgages. If the home prices continued to climb, the homeowners who had difficulty paying the mortgage would be able to get additional funds needed by borrowing against the increased value of their homes, and crisis would therefore be averted. Theoretically, if home prices had just stopped growing or even reached a little bit, there would have been no crisis. Bank rating agencies can see that historically. The worst case scenario would be the home prices would have dipped by a few percent because this, they gave a high rating to a large amount of pooled and repackaged mortgage debt, mortgage-backed securities. That included subprime mortgages and the like. Basically, they said these mortgage-based investments are good investments because historically housing prices have only decreased by a small percentage. Had the bond rating agencies been correct in their assertion, then those investments would have paid off greatly. Instead, according to Case-Shiller Index figures, U.S. home prices fell 19.5%. They became known as toxic assets. The reason this is so important is because these mortgage-backed securities became investments that moved through the financial system. So when these investments went bad, they went bad in the financial sector as well. This is how the mortgage crisis spread into the financial system and became a general financial crisis. Now begs the question, who is to blame for all this? Well, the primary factor is capitalism itself. The term zombie capitalism coined by David Harvey to describe the mindless drive toward profits. That is the very nature of capitalism itself, profits or death. That is why capitalists have the saying, you're either growing or you're slowly dying. If the drive towards maximum profits is not being met, then any enterprise doing so will be crushed by its more profitable competitors. Capitalism is not going to do anything but make greater and greater profits with no regard to the consequences, even at the risk of its own destruction. At this point, many intellectually honest people would be arguing that this is the very reason why we have regulation, to prevent crises like this from happening, to restrain the mindless drive towards profits, its inevitable consequences. That is true. However, it is important to note that these money manipulators, investors, have no limit to the creativity and resourcefulness they can draw upon to get around any regulation written. No matter how many new regulations or laws are written, they always find a way around them, creating the same or newer risky investments that put everyone at risk. It doesn't matter how many times you regulate them or in what way, they will always invent new ones. The fact is, capitalism is always praised for and is based on the idea of risk, except for this is not some notion of mom and pop convenience stores going out of business. This is the global economy crashing and impoverishing hundreds of millions of people, vastly affecting the cost of food and causing hunger as a result. This is one of the reasons why market fundamentalists, libertarians, always use the example of two isolated producers in exchange, leaving out the social context or even acknowledging that these exchanges take place on a much larger scale in real life. This deliberate ignoring of how economies function outside the two small producers is what leads to the inevitable non sequiturs and straw man arguments the ideology makes. This is the reason why radical leftists use the term capitalism can't be reformed, because it literally cannot be reformed. This is not to say the capitalist class cannot recognize inherent weaknesses in its own system. They can be blind to them at times and completely ignore them. At no point will they learn some lesson in some way. They do, after all, have a vested interest in keeping the capitalist system its source of their wealth and privilege. They are always aware that a truly free market does not, cannot, and will never work. That is why capitalists who really hold power in society do advocate regulation, basically because they're greedy, not stupid. Here enters the idea of state intervention in the economy, more so the regulation of the financial sector in this case. Real capitalists, the people driving the world economy, know this is necessary, as opposed to pretend capitalists, the libertarians, who don't own any means of production and employ others in its use. Every time a crisis happens, they think or willingly delude themselves into thinking that this will be the last one. As a result, they keep needing new interventions in order to save the capitalist system. This is why the banks really got a bailout, because it would have meant the death of the capitalist system globally if they didn't. If you support and believe in capitalism, then you simply must support the bailouts. If not, you'd be condemning it to die. During the aftermath of the crisis, the U.S. government dismantled Bear Stearns and nationalized Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac and AIG. Combined with the bailouts, it seemed to send a mixed message to the public on exactly what was happening. Some people decried it as making the rich richer, not allowing the rich to pay for their mistakes, to soak up the risk of their own failed investments. Others saw it as a progressive move, a move away from a free market. But both of these views are incorrect. The government works for the capitalist class, and as such is dedicated to defending its interests. These takeovers by the government are not ideological shifts. They are pragmatic ones, because they know what needs to be done in order to save the class as a whole. Capitalists willing to sacrifice the lives of tens of millions every year in order to sustain their wealth. It's just that this time, some of their own, along with those tens of millions, had to be sacrificed to keep their system going. This is, in keeping with the reality of capitalism, a mad run towards profits no matter the cost, even if they have to trip a few of their own along the way. This semi-nationalization is in keeping with Marx's writings. It was a necessity that the capitalist class recognized. It was not an ideological shift, it was a pragmatic one. As Marx noted, the capitalist functions only as personified capital. The rule of the capitalist over the worker is actually the rule of things, capital over man, of the product, capital over the producer. The capitalist class profits from the existence of capitalism, but the force of capitalism itself is inherently beyond their control. Capitalism will always drive towards the accumulation of value for the sake of value, regardless of how destructive, even self-destructive it is. This is one of the major points missed by those who advocate reforming capitalism, like social democrats, or as it was just put by Cuban economists who are attempting to justify a turn towards capitalism, markets with social justice.